Mark McHargue's life is about popcorn and hogs, and soybeans, and irrigated corn, and a nursery, and he also owns a business with his son building homes in the area. And he's the president of the Nebraska Farm Bureau. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. You might say Mark has his hands full these days. As we talked in the second week of February, there were a lot of concerns from farmers who have not been getting their funding from the USDA like they had expected. And they're also worried about the president's trade war. What will that mean? Plus, inflation is still too high. There's a lot going on. Now, Mark is still optimistic about the future. We're going to get to all of that, but we're going to start with the weather. All right, Mark, we're talking to you on a day where we're both experiencing some snow. So thanks to the technology that allows us to connect, right?
Yeah, it's really pretty amazing. And, snow days all look different for everybody, but for agriculture and farming, sometimes it's good to in my role, I try to clean my desk off, but I haven't got that far yet, Dave, today. So
Same. I just barely got into that just so that I'd have enough room to fire this baby up. But I think that's going to be on the to-do list tomorrow too, probably. Hey, will you start off, talk a little bit about how you got to where you are?
Yeah, Dave, that's quite a story. I tell it often, but really growing up, fourth generation farmer, and here in Merritt County, Nebraska, growing corn, soybeans, hogs, grow a lot of popcorn. We're doing some organic farming as well. But getting from just waking up every day thinking about the farm to representing Nebraska agriculture as president of Nebraska Farm Bureau is quite a step. And I was talking to a group of young farmers and ranchers just this last weekend, and it's really, I could not have picked this particular path, but as God would have it, it tends to not be a very straight path, but you can kind of trace it back to how you got here. And it really was a matter of just kind of raising your hand or stepping through that opportunity that presented itself. And you wake up and you look back and it's like, I get to talk about agriculture every day to a lot of times people that don't understand agriculture, and it's quite a privilege, I can tell you. And then to still be involved in the farm, certainly on the management side, is really, I think it's one of the greatest jobs that I can do at this point.
I feel like maybe as a society, one of the benefits of suffering through COVID is that it's made a lot of us at least take a step back and kind of reassess, maybe look at balance, look at kind of priorities, all kinds of stuff. How do you balance everything where you went into this before, you're focused on family and your farm operation. Now you're focused on everybody's for the most part in the state, right? And part of that includes, travel and such too. So how do you make sure you're not neglecting one for the other?
Yeah, I think it's a balance that, within agriculture, it's something that I think we really struggle with, quite frankly. I did. We grew up, raised all the kids on the farm, and there's always something asking for your time. We had livestock operation, and that's every day, 7 days a week. Doesn't matter if it's holidays or what it is, or snowstorms or sickness. You had to get up there and do it. In this position, I have a little bit more flexibility, but you still have to manage your time. And fortunately, I've got some really good people in the office that kind of help keep track of when I'm coming and going. And so I lean on that, but it's still a real challenge of just balancing the time with my wife and the home and the grandkids and time on the road. And I think that's regardless of the job that you're in, that's something that's I think always a challenge, but we're working at it. It's not perfect, but when I wake up today though versus when I was actively every day on the farm, my job is to be advocating for agriculture, Nebraska agriculture, and so that helps me prioritize my time.
I appreciate you bringing that up. And like you and I were talking about before we started, this was not my background getting into this, so it's been a fascinating learning experience. I'm curious, when you're telling the anecdote about the balance, when you are talking, because we have a lot of folks who listen, whether they listen to us or watch us, depending on the format they use here. But for those who did not grow up like I did not grow up on a farm, but are curious about it and learning about it and all that stuff, how do you communicate, especially to younger people, what it is like for that lifestyle to have a 7 day a week commitment? Before we started, I was joking that we just got hit with our first really good snowstorm of the year. You dealt with it yesterday as well. My kids don't have school today because we're going to get 6 to 8 inches of snow, right? Well, it doesn't work that way on the farm. How do you communicate that, especially when you're talking to younger people who are thinking about what they want to do, when they grow up? That, look, you might be signing on to a 7 day a week gig, and just because it's January doesn't mean you're taking a 3 week vacation to Florida, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
communicate that to people?
I think it has to be, I hesitate to say it has to be in your DNA because that's actually not true, because we're encouraging people that have not experienced the farm to really think about agriculture as an occupation. There's so many occupations, but you do have to have a love for what you do. And I would say, for me, it tended to be livestock. And the fact that when you had a snowstorm like we've had, um, that's just the commitment. You have to have the mindset of those animals, those crops that really cannot take care of themselves, are dependent on us. That does drive you a little bit. That it's like, it's not fair to them, for me to be messing around at home on a snow day when I'm not for sure if they have water, if they have feed, and they're comfortable. And so that does drive you to get out and just do that every day, because there is just a higher responsibility of what you're involved in, and the fact that they are in your care, especially relative to livestock. And so, on the grain side, it's a little bit different, but that's also, you grow crops for a season. And just like you would have a garden, if you neglect that garden, you will not get the produce. And that's your living when you're a farmer. And so if you neglect it, uh, you don't get the money to pay the bills. Well, that has its own consequences, right? And so there is both internal and external things that drive you to that. But I can tell you, um, I have a lot of satisfying things that I get to do advocating for agriculture. But when you walk into that hog barn and you see those hogs that are healthy and they're happy, and it's a blizzard outside and they're oblivious to it, that is really satisfying. It's really, really satisfying to get the combine out and to harvest that crop that you have put the 7 days a week in, to ensure that it has all the nutrient it needs, it has all the water it needs to your best ability. It thrived as well as you can, and then you get to harvest that, see the fruits of that labor. There is not much out there that's more satisfying, and it drives you year after year to do that.
All right, so folks like you all across the country right now are you try to navigate livelihoods, the future, all of that with politics, right? We have
Yeah.
a changing of the guard in Washington, D.C. We've got Republicans now in charge of both chambers. You got a Republican president who's returned to office, and everybody's trying to figure out what's he want to do, what kind of policies. He's done a bunch of stuff in the first month or so that he's been in office, and there's a lot of uncertainty, right? We're trying to figure out what the tariffs are going to do, which ones are actually going to go through, how long they're going to be there. Certain programs have been paused. We're not even going
Yeah.
to get into the legal side of that, whether that's legal or not legal, but it puts a lot of things up in the air. And I've heard, we read these stories anecdotally about farmers across the country that have invested in some kind of project. They think they have some kind of federal funding coming in, and all of a sudden it's put on pause and they're thinking, what have I just done?
Mhm.
So what's your experience of what's going on in Nebraska right now, and what do you then try to communicate to your DC delegation about what your folks need?
Yeah, I mean, there's really a lot to unpack
Yeah,
there.
sorry, that was a long-winded question. Sorry.
Yeah, I will, I will pull that apart kind of to your very last part of that. So the programs that people have signed up for and have committed to, and the federal government on their side of the equation has said, you know what, if you do this, or you do this activity, or you install this thing on your farm that's going to be a little more environmentally friendly, save water, whatever, uh, we will commit. If you pay a certain amount, we'll pay you a certain amount. I have that situation on my farm right
Mm,
now.
mm,
I actually have a center pivot, a watering device that irrigates our fields. Um, we've been waiting for some funding on this particular pivot, and the funding finally came through a year ago.
okay.
And it was funded. We're actually installing it this late fall and this winter. It's mostly installed, and
Okay.
it's a significant project. It's well over $150,000, and we would not have done it if we didn't have some extra help to do that. We already had the ability to water it, but it's just going to be more efficient, and the
Hmm.
program is available. So I literally go in last week and start working on the payment, and they said they're all payments are froze. I'm like,
What's that?
how, how does that work? I mean, we
Yeah,
have a signed contract.
right.
And so it's very real to me. I understand it. It is happening for sure. Now, is that going to be permanent? Are we going to work through some of that? Because I have the ability to have a lot of great connections. I've worked some of those connections both in the state, in DC, and have said, hey, this is a real deal,
Hmm.
and we should be about at a minimum honoring those contracts that are signed. I get it if there's a lot of money sitting there that has not been allocated.
Hmm.
But anyway, that's a little bit of my personal feeling, but that is also I am right in the middle of that, and it is real. It's happening.
But it is tough, and that's the part that I'm hearing from people that they're trying to communicate with DC right now is that, hey, yeah, we're 36 plus trillion dollars in debt. Gotta take a deeper look at how we're spending money. And I think for the most part, people by and large agree with something like that. The tougher part is if there are signed deals with promised funding about stuff, how do you go back and either renege on it, which would be the ultimate fear, or even just pausing it? Because putting a pause on stuff, I mean, that throws people's lives into chaos because you have no idea. You're like, wait a minute, I'm in knee deep here, and I may never get this. Are you kidding me? Like, you would assume that's not going to persist.
Yeah, I mean, we're not all independently wealthy, right?
Yeah,
Right. And
for
so you
sure.
take some of these risks because you knew that the other side of the equation, and who would ever think that the government would default on their commitments?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's not even really something we thought about. And so anyway, we find ourselves in a situation. So I think it's important to now groups like Farm Bureau that have those connections. It's incumbent on us to message appropriately and understand the big picture, just like you laid out very well. But at the same time, there are ways to do that. There's probably measured ways to do that, and I'm pretty confident that we'll probably find a spot here where it works. But it's a little awkward right now, that's for sure.
I appreciate the way you're saying that with the messaging. And is it because that's your personality, or is it because you know at the end of the day this is going to get resolved? I'm thinking that some of the younger people would say, about going in hot on something, right? Like, how do you not go in hot? Because surely you're getting hot phone calls and messages from people in Nebraska who have to be wanting you to light up some of these members of Congress to get this fixed, and even your own
Sure.
personal situation. So
Right.
how do you know what the right approach is to convey the urgency to these folks without pushing it too far?
Well, I think in this situation, I think we can look back historically. President Trump, was in office, and so we did get a glimpse into how he functions, his thought process, how he really does, whether you like it or not. his manner of getting things done is to go in, be disruptive, get all the balls up in the air, get the conversations going. And then it seems like he kind of has the way of working that out, but sometimes it does take a little while. So that's what I'm basing, part of my measured approach, because of knowing that's a little bit uh, how he functions. But at the same time, it's important that when you deal with elected officials, and we've learned this over time, just really screaming and hollering does not necessarily move them any faster than having a solid relationship, having conversations that has good data and information behind it, and really working within the system. Some of our representatives can be just as frustrated as we are, but that doesn't mean that they don't have to work within their system as well. And it really is a system, and sometimes it takes a while. So I would say that's the reason I am a little bit more measured. But I'm not saying I did not call my representatives. I talked to the governor the other day about it. I mean, we're working all the channels we got here. So
All right, let's talk about something that I know you've also spoken about, which is hopefully a positive change. Mexico kind of dropping this hesitation, refusal with GMO corn. How big a deal is that? And I'm talking to you from Iowa, talking to a guy in Nebraska, so clearly corn's important to both our respective states. So how big a deal is this?
well, I think from it's frustrating that it kind of took the pressure of a tariff to really maybe get it completely over the hill, because that is the reason that we do trade deals, is to work out how we are going to, by a rules-based system, trade with one another. And we felt like uh, them putting this ban on GMO corn was really violating how we have laid out in the USMCA, our trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, how we're going to trade. We felt like it violated that. So that's the reason we've been pushing back hard on that. And as a representative of Nebraska, uh, and you're accurate from Iowa as well. We have designed our rail systems to take corn straight into Mexico.
Hmm.
93% of Nebraska's corn exports go to Mexico. I mean, that is a massive amount. And so when you have a country, your neighbor, really putting what we feel like is pretty arbitrary rules in base or bans, that is frustrating. And that's the reason we've been working really hard on that. I appreciate the fact that President Trump uh, used that leverage of a tariff that we don't appreciate, swinging that hammer all the time, but just the threat of that seemed to push that over. So I think that I will certainly give him a point in the win column for getting that to happen.
Uh,
Should have happened a long time ago.
do you, because of your kind of a measured approach to all of this, is that the way you're looking at tariffs too? That hopefully this is going to end up just being his negotiating tactic with that giant hammer. I saw North Dakota Senator Ken Conrad said his Trump style is basically you go into a room, you throw a grenade, and then you go back in there and pick up the pieces and try to put together whatever's left, something like that. Are you looking at tariffs like that, that the hope in your gut is that this is kind of a jar and a threat, but push comes to shove, maybe people are willing to move a little bit and it doesn't actually happen?
Probably not.
Okay.
I truly do think that he thinks tariffs. Um,
Are the way to go.
I think I think he believes that, and he has said it, that it's a good way to fund the government, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
When you put a tariff on different countries, that money that does go into the federal government, I think goes into a reserve. So I I don't think that's a good way to do business. I think to use a tariff as a tool to uh, push someone to comply with trade agreements, maybe in a short term, I think that's accurate. But boy, to put across the board tariffs on without strategically knowing why, just to put them on. Maybe
Hmm.
he knows why. I don't. I don't think the general public necessarily knows in every case. I think that's a pretty broad use of a tariff that I don't think is helpful for trade, and certainly for agriculture. The issue is that when a retaliatory countries retaliate, push back, it typically comes against agriculture. And then
Hmm.
so obviously representing agriculture, that becomes more problematic because uh, we're pretty good. We got a pretty strong lobby and we start screaming and raising our hands. I'm very cognizant that if we're not measured, we're doing exactly what these other countries want us to do and go, hey, don't do that, don't
Hmm.
tariff. And so I'm cognizant that we need to be careful. But to your question, long-winded answer, I think he truly does believe that tariffs have a bigger role than we historically have used them for.
Hey, this is a podcast, man. It's a place for long-winded answers, so that's why I love this format. But your example of 93% of your corn exported to Mexico, I mean that really underscores the concerns if tariffs happen and especially if they persist, right? Because we as a country are just unbelievable, at least in my opinion, just unbelievable about it's like every year, every couple of years, whatever the right period is, we just keep getting better at growing stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like it's kind
absolutely.
of it's just it's insane. It's just remarkable how it just keeps getting better, better, better. But we're almost too good, right? So we grow too much stuff, so we have to export so that folks like you can get the return you're actually looking to get, right? And to make a living out of this and not sweat out every week. So is that really kind of the core of it that it can't screw us on exports?
Well, yeah, 100%. So again, not every country is like United States, and not every state is like the breadbasket of the Midwest,
Hmm.
where we have abundant land, we do really good production. We have been at it for a lot of generations, and we have really, I think we are some of the best producers in the world. And because of that, we have the ability, I would say both the ability and the responsibility to share that access around the world to people that do not have the resources that we have. And those people around the world maybe have resources that we need that we don't have. And that's what makes trade work in a beautiful symbiotic way, right? We have the ability to produce food. We are trading that with other people's ability to produce things that we don't have. Now, that is not always true in all ag areas of the world. I was in the UK in November, and we had the opportunity to really interact with the producers over there in the UK. And I would say they do not have the ability because of the regulatory environment to produce at a high level and continuing to be at a higher and higher level of production using the same natural resources. They don't have the ability to do that. And they don't have the desire to really push production so they can really export it and send it to other parts of the world. A lot of what they produce, they use in house, but that's not the model that we're functioning under. And so we have to have a little different conversation here in the Midwest, and that's the reason if we get a pushback like Mexico, for instance, we get a 25% tariff, they turn around and do a 25% tariff on our corn. We are not the only ones that can supply Mexico with corn.
Right.
Argentina can supply Mexico with corn. Yes, it takes a little different route to get it in there. It's not as convenient, but the market will always dictate eventually at what route trade will travel and where people buy it from. And we have to remember that. I mean, I've been in offices around the world, and you think we're going to go over there and we're going to sell them Nebraska Midwest
Hmm.
products, and you look over there and there's someone from Argentina, there's someone from
Yeah.
Brazil in the same room, wanting to sell them their cattle and their products.
Hmm.
And so uh, we live in a global market, and people are globally trying to get everybody to buy from their country. So that's the reason we have to be cognizant of all these conversations.
If this isn't getting too personal, are you willing to talk a little bit about how your own farm, how you've decided to do what you do rather than just go, I'm a corn guy or I'm a bean guy or maybe I'm going to rotate whatever. I mean, the way you explained it, you get got a couple of things going. Are you willing to kind of talk about why you diversify like you do?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have diversified to the extent that we are doing organic now in about 45% of our acres. And that was really, we stepped back and we looked at all the resources on the farm. And we have a hog operation, we have the manure of that a hog operation,
Hmm.
and we literally made the decision, what is the best use of the different aspects of the farm and how can we really put that into a marketing model that really can best serve us from a business model. And we decided that really using that manure from our hog operation, its highest value is not just substitute commercial fertilizer. It's substituting fertilizer that can go into an organic operation that is more difficult to get the nutrients because you
Hmm.
can't use readily, other sources of commercial fertilizer. So that was the choice. It wasn't a choice of we believe that if you don't grow organic or you don't eat organic, the world's going to, shrivel up and die.
Sure.
But when I also stepped back and looked at when we went through our significant recession in 2008, 9, 10, and through there, I was really cognizant of the shelf space in the grocery stores.
Hmm.
And you would think that if people were really limited in what they could spend, I thought before that point, I thought, you know what? If it really gets down to it and you only have so much to spend, that consumer uh, is going to buy that less costly food item,
Hmm.
or they're gonna spend it on something else. The space of organic in shelves, the grocery shelves grew significantly during that period. I was like,
Wait a
you know, I
minute.
I was kind of like, so anyway, that's what got us into it, but it's a diversification. And then on the hogs, we have the opportunity to grow popcorn here in our area because we have a really great
Hmm.
processor, and that has diversified things. And I would say we have come from a farming or operation, and my dad has always been very entrepreneurial. I've always been very entrepreneurial with my brother that I farm with, and so we're never quite happy doing the same thing, exactly the same every year. And so that has cost us occasionally.
Hmm.
But it's also the reason I diversified with my younger son. He didn't really like the farm quite as much, but he was the guy that liked to repair things. And he literally come to me one day and said, "Hey, Dad, we should build something." I'm like, "Well, I don't know, what do you want to build?" He was working off the farm, and he said, "Well, let's build a duplex." And so, on the side, we built a duplex, and now we have a company that's probably 8 years old, and we've built over 160 homes. And so that's a diversification to the farm, but has really benefited our rural community, and it's helped me then as an ag producer that got my head down looking at ag to kind of step back and look at our rural communities a little different too. And that, yes, ag drives our rural communities, but we have a lot of people that would like to live in a rural community
Hmm. You
if
gotta
they
live
had
somewhere.
if they had access to internet, they had some of the parks and trails, entertainment and restaurants. It doesn't have to be to a large scale, but those are all things that are needed in a rural community. And I would say before I got into that diversification, I probably had a little more one-track mind. It's just grow the best corn we can, but that's helped me have a little broader perspective of diversification as well.
And maybe this is good for your business, but as I was telling you before we recorded, for the last 25 years, my primary gig is covering politics for TV, and I am astounded how few politicians could have just given that soundbite that you just said and have not focused harder on housing in rural communities. And like in Iowa, roughly 70%, maybe something like that, of the counties have shrunk in population over the last decade
Mhm.
or two, right? I mean, that should be alarming because that's not sustainable. And we're going to have a bunch of hollowed out towns with nobody living
Right.
there. The schools are closing, hospitals, all kinds of stuff, right? But at the core of it, you got to have a place to live that you can afford. But there doesn't seem to be that mass attention to it about, all right, well, let's build some stuff.
Well, and I would say it's really interesting. I mean, Farm Bureau as a farm organization, but when you step back one notch, we're really about rural America. Um,
Hmm.
I could have never told you that 10 years ago that one of our top priorities was having a conversation about daycare and about housing. And we're 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 just like every other occupation. We are looking for people to work on our farms, and daycare is one of the limiting factors, and housing is one of the limiting factors. And so we actually, as a farm organization, we are lobbying politically for ways that we can make childcare more affordable. We're lobbying for ways to make workforce development housing more affordable. I mean, we're lobbying for ways for just the general workforce to be accessible and get driver's license and be able to do all those things that really wasn't part of the conversation a number of years ago. But that's the place we find ourselves in, and if we don't dig into that, uh, truly the ability for even agriculture to function in rural America to the degree and prosperity that it can, we won't be able to do that if we don't keep our towns alive and thriving.
And perhaps Nebraska is the same way, but we've had some of our larger employers in some smaller communities. We have Sukup Manufacturing in Sheffield, Iowa. Now that's a facility that, has hundreds of employees. They have built their own, so they have their own health clinics for workers. They have daycare. We also have in Pella, Iowa, the company, they have, Vermeer is one of the companies there. But same deal, investing in a daycare. And, and some of these are larger in the sense that you have hundreds of employees. But it's come to that they've had to just solve the problem themselves
Yep.
because otherwise they can't get a workforce.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's just I would say in agriculture, that is one of our significant hurdles that we have to navigate. And it's not been just since COVID.
Hmm.
I mean, that was part of it, but it's part of the reason at the beginning of the show, I talked about just our ability to uh, get workforce and encouraging people to really consider some aspect of agriculture as a career option. And it's not just driving a tractor or actually being on the farm. It's the biologist, it's the computer scientist, it's the accountants, it's lawyers, it's all those aspects that really can have an agricultural focus
Hmm.
and still be a part of agriculture and be a part of the agricultural family that really has this high calling of feeding and clothing and fueling the world, and being a part of that. And they've never thought about it. They just thought that agriculture is just this being out there on the farm and with a piece of straw in your mouth and with a pitchfork, and that's
Hmm.
just absolutely not the case.
In your bib overalls.
Right.
All right, so man, this is what happens when you get two guys talking on a snow day and get into some deep stuff.
Right.
Hey, leave us with we talked about some of the challenges, but leave us with something good. What's got you optimistic in 2025 that you're experiencing or that you think we're going, a place where we're going?
Yeah, I think within the ag sector, we are at such a inflection point of the ability to uh, do things with things that we grow out of the soil, the bioeconomy. We haven't really talked about that, but the ability to produce energy, nylon, acrylics, anything that petroleum does, we can grow. And so that's on the farm side. And then really on the livestock side, we just continue to produce more, really with the MAHA movement and people really saying, you know what, the fact that we've taken meat out of our diets is crazy. And that if we really want to be healthy, we need to get meat back in our diets. You put a number of those things together, and agriculture is at the epicenter of those conversations and really is going to be exciting. And so that's the reason we just come on and continue to make sure that glide path, that we take the regulatory stuff, the ag policies, we do that really well, so that at the core of what we do well as producers, we don't have things slowing us down. And so I'm really excited about the future of agriculture, and would encourage anybody that's thinking about really pursuing something in agriculture, there's a bright spot. It's not like the 80s where, you know what, don't come back to the farm. And I would say absolutely find a way to come back to the farm or be in proximity to agriculture because the future is really bright.
Mark, we appreciate the conversation. Thank you much.
Absolutely, Dave.
Glad you got snowed in.
Yeah, that worked out.
Mark McHargue is also involved with a national foundation. It's committed to improving the lives for people like his daughter. You can learn more about that in our profile piece about him in the American Farmland Owner newsletter. Check it out at AmericanFarmlandowner.com. If you go there and enter your email address, you can get the AFO newsletter emailed to you every week for free. AmericanFarmlandowner.com. And we leave you with a request. Please like, share, and subscribe this podcast and let everybody in your life know about it. It helps us grow.